In this video, we're going to discuss some very simple mathematical calculations that you can perform within Excel. So to begin with, let's talk about adding and subtracting. So these numbers that you see here are example data that you might have gotten from a general chemistry lab where you're trying to determine the density of an unknown liquid. And so we're going to use this as a platform through which we're going to discuss adding and subtracting, average, standard deviation, and then also absolute value. So to begin with, what we have here is a final level, liquid level in the burette and an initial liquid level. And so you notice all of them have correct sig figs. But if we come down here where we're looking at numbers that were recorded from a balance, now you would have recorded your numbers, every number that you saw on the scale, into your lab notebook. But when you typed them into Excel, if this number, for instance, it ended with 2 zeros, it would have gotten rid of those zeros for you. Unless, as we learned in a previous video, you stored it as a number and then you adjusted those decimal places accordingly, where we needed 4 decimals because we had maybe an analytical balance. Or if you had a less sensitive balance, you may have only had 3 decimals or even only 2. It just depends on which balance type you used. But I now have fixed my decimals, so that way I have 4 sig figs showing, 4 decimal places, showing for my masses and 2 decimal places showing for my burettes. So now let's do some math on them. So if this was my final and this was my initial, to give me a total volume of liquid delivered, I would click into this cell and type equals, and I need to subtract them, right? So then I would click onto the 29, and then I would hit minus 14.71. And that's all you do for subtraction. You just simply put in the plus, the minus, the division symbol, wherever you need it to be. All right, and I'm going to hit enter. Now, something to remember we talked about previously cell references, and so there's absolute and relative references. That is a relative reference because it does not have the dollar signs included. And so what that means is I can take this mathematical calculation that I just did and I can drag it over, and now each one is set up so that way it is the difference between the value in row 4 minus the value in row 5. And that's the way it is for both of them. And so you can see that this absolute versus relative referencing is very helpful. So these are all relative references. So we just did a little subtraction. Now something else that's really cool is I can now just copy those values. So Control C for me, Command C for you Mac users, and I can paste it right here. But notice these are all different values now. They moved themselves down a couple rows because the values moved down and the formula moved it down too. And so alternatively, I could have, instead of copying and pasting my value, I could have just typed it in once again, 150 my B7 minus my B8, and then hit enter, and then I could have dragged it over, but you'll get the exact same thing. If it were addition, it's the exact same thing. You would just have a plus sign between the formulas. And notice something that is helpful is as you're typing it, so let's say you chose to type D7, if I had just accidentally made an error and started typing D8, it would turn black as opposed to these colors that identify that you are using a formula as opposed to just text. And so it immediately automatically gives it a color. So now I've done my subtraction. This next one says experimental density of a liquid. It's the same principle. We know density is mass divided by volume, so we'd equal, and then we select our mass, and that's why I highlighted them both in yellow to try and help myself see that, divided by my volume, and then hit enter, and now I can drag it over. Alright, some things to note is how did I highlight this yellow? I selected the cells that I wanted to highlight, and I went to this little painter's hat, kind of like a graduation hat to me, and you just pick the color that you want it to be. Alright, but now we have our density of our liquid, but you should notice that that's way more sig figs than we need. And same thing for this mass of liquid delivered, that's way too few sig figs, so we need to fix these first. So now there's 4 decimal places, but if there's 4 sig figs in this volume, and there's 6 for the mass, you would report 4 sig figs here in this final experimental density. Because remember, here you're adding and subtracting with sig figs, and here you're also adding or subtracting, so you just keep the same number of decimal places consistent, but then in this row we are multiplying or dividing, which means we have to go with the lowest number of sig figs, which is a product of our volume. And so since our volume has only 4 sig figs, we need to adjust these so that way they only have 4 sig figs. Done. Alright, now average. Average is a function. So I told you what the functions are, but what's really cool about Excel is if you just start typing, it's going to suggest things to you. So let's say you're like, I want to do average, what might I type? And you just start typing average, and you'll notice that it'll say average. So then if you click on it, it's going to tell you how you do your formula. So in this case, average number 1, so I go click on number 1, and then I could also click on number 2. I could hit the control button and click on each of those numbers. That's one way to do it. Or I like doing, if they're all in a row like this, you just click on the first one and drag. Okay, but they're going to give you the same number. So this colon between it means it's a range. It's a range from B10 to D10. Okay. Alternatively, like I said before, you could have clicked on the first one, held down the control key, clicked on the second, held down the third. Or you could have just typed it all in where you put commas between each of your numbers. And now you could close that with the parentheses, but it's not going to cause you any problems if you just hit enter. It's going to automatically add that parentheses there for you. Okay, so just to kind of prove that they're the same number, here by doing my commas, it was 0.9977. If I would have done the range instead, you will get the exact same thing. Okay, and then same thing here. So we're going to find the standard deviation of our numbers. So if you just start typing in standard deviation, and then you go click on your numbers, and then you hit enter, you now have a standard deviation. And then fix the number of sig figs that are showing. I always click the wrong one first. Alrighty, and you should have 4 sig figs showing. Check. Alright, so now we've worked through some of the basic math. We've done adding, subtraction, multiplication, division, and then next we want to do our absolute value. So why do we want to do absolute value? That's because the percent error formula involves the absolute value symbol. So the symbol here, our absolute value symbol. So in order to do that, we need either, you can call it either the measured minus the accepted, or you can call it the experimental minus theoretical. They mean the same thing. So in this case, accepted density of water from the table. So if our temperature of water was 25, then we can let's color it green. We can come over here and we can say, all right, instead of just typing in all of those numbers and possibly making a mistake, type equals and then go click on your value from your table. And that's going to automatically bring that right there. All right, now we need to type in our formula, and we need to type it in. So in the handout, it talked about doing it like this. So I'm going to copy that formula over. In order to copy a formula over, you need to click in this function bar here and before you paste. It'll just work out a little better. So then we have number 1 minus number 2. Number 1 is your measured value. So that's here, minus your accepted value. So I'm going to delete that and put my accepted value divided by my accepted value. And then you hit enter. But one thing I wanted to call your attention to first is Excel tries to help you make sure you got your parentheses right. If you remember back to grade school, and please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, those parentheses matter. And so the red is one group here, and then the black arrows go around those. And then it looks like I have one extra parentheses in my formula. But then the 100 is in front in this equation. If you notice down here, it's at the end. And the reason we have you put it in the front is just simply because so many students mess up and put one too few of parentheses. And so if you did it at the end, you'd have to have another parentheses here and another parentheses here in order to not, in order to keep order of operations appropriate. And then you hit enter, and that's our percent error. This percent error already has units of a percent, but if we were to click on it and remove that times 100, we could turn it into a percentage another way, just letting Excel identify that that is a percentage. And you once again could adjust your sig figs, but first I recommend turning these into a number or it will not let you. You turn both into numbers, and then let's increase those decimals so we can see all of those beautiful decimal places there displayed. And then here, accepted density, let's give it some more decimals, and we're good to go. But do note that whenever Excel does this calculation, it does not use the rounded version of your number. It uses the final, the complete, with lots and lots of sig figs from this table.